What should I plant for pollinators is a question that I get pretty frequently. The answer for that question is different for everyone. But what I can do is share with you some of the native plants that I love and why I love them, so that you can decide if they are right for you. Nature isn't just out there in some far-off exotic location. It's all around us, including right outside our doors. Hi, my name is Shannon Trimboli, and I am the host of Backyard Ecology. I invite you to join us as we ignite our curiosity and natural wonder, explore our yards and communities, and improve our local pollinator and wildlife habitat. Hi everyone! Before we get started, I wanted to thank all of my supporters on Patreon. Their monthly donations help make Backyard Ecology possible. If you would like to join them, please visit my Patreon page. I'll have links in the show notes for the Backyard Ecology Patreon page, blog, YouTube channel, and email list. Late summer is often thought of as a challenging time for gardening. It's hot, it's humid, we may or may not be getting regular rainfall, and there are often lots of other summertime activities competing for our attention. But if our goal is to plant for pollinators and wildlife, then it is important to make sure that we have plenty of plants blooming at this time of year too. So I thought I'd share some of the native plants that I love, which bloom in the July-August timeframe, and that attract a lot of pollinators. Now, I actually have a whole lot more than 5 species that I really love, but I don't want to overwhelm you. So I thought I would start with 5, see how it goes, and if we all like this type of episode, then I may do more of them and turn this into a series in the future. Now, I want to be clear. I am not saying that these are the best native plants to plant. That would make a better clickbait title, but it wouldn't be true. Because while we would all love an easy, simple, prescriptive list of best native plants to plant for pollinators, the truth is that there isn't one. The best plant is going to depend on a long list of factors that include your location and what type of pollinators that you want to attract. I can help guide you towards figuring out the best plants for your unique situation, but that's best done through one-on-one conversations and is part of what Anthony and I do with our habitat consulting business. So if that's a conversation that you would be interested in having, feel free to contact me. We offer both virtual and in-person consultation services and would be happy to discuss those options with you. This list is simply some of the native plants that I love and are in no particular order, because my favorite has a tendency to change based on which one I'm looking at and what pollinators I'm thinking about. Oh, and remember that I'm in Kentucky. So while all of these plants have pretty large ranges, I'm not guaranteeing that they are native throughout the entire eastern U.S. You'll have to look up the plant to see if it is native where you live. So let's get started. Purple coneflower, Echinacea purpurea, is a perennial native to most of the eastern 2/3 of the U.S. It has become popular in the horticulture trade, so it's also pretty easy to find, even if you don't have a native plant nursery near you. Just be aware that its popularity in the traditional horticultural world also means that there are now multiple cultivars of purple coneflower available. Those cultivars may or may not be as attractive to pollinators as the original or straight species. Some of the reasons that I love purple coneflowers are because they're so hardy and so many different types of pollinators and wildlife love them. They like full sun to part shade and are drought tolerant, so are much less unhappy during periodic summer droughts. They also produce abundant purple flowers for a pretty long period of time. Bees and butterflies of all kinds love to sip the nectar. The bees will also collect the pollen for their brood. Silvery checker spot caterpillars also use purple coneflowers as host plants. I've had plants in the nursery completely defoliated by silvery checker spot caterpillars. Then within a month or so, the plants have completely new leaves to the point that you really can't even tell that they were ever eaten, and many will bloom later in the season. If you want, you can deadhead the purple coneflowers before they go to seed in order to encourage new blooms. Personally, I never have time to deadhead, which means that I always get to enjoy watching the goldfinches devouring the seeds. Even if you do deadhead, I encourage you to leave the last of the seed heads on the plants for the goldfinches to enjoy. It is so much fun watching them. Purple coneflower doesn't spread very much, which means it plays nice with other plants in the same garden bed. It'll spread some, but more like what most of us want our garden plants to spread, not in the crazy, let's take over everything way that some plants spread. I love planting it next to plants that have bright yellow flowers at the same time. I just really like that bright yellow and purple contrast next to each other. Speaking of bright yellow flowers that bloom at the same time as purple coneflowers, another native plant that I love, which blooms at this time of year, is the black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia hirta. Black-eyed Susans are also fairly easy to find and are native to most of the U.S. Again, there are multiple cultivars available, which may or may not be as attractive to pollinators as the straight species. I just love the bright yellow flower heads of the black-eyed Susans. They always make me smile. I also love the fact that they bloom pretty much throughout the entire summer. Like purple coneflowers, all kinds of bees and butterflies love to visit them. They are also the host plant for silvery checker spot and pearl crescent caterpillars. And goldfinches love to devour the seed heads. The furry leaves also give them some level of deer resistance and are fun to play with for those of us who like touching leaves and feeling the differences between them. Depending on where you are at, black-eyed Susans are classified as everything from a biennial to a short-lived perennial. Mine come back year after year, often from the same individual, but they also self-seed regularly, so I never have to worry about if an individual plant dies out after a few years. Since they do self-seed pretty freely, they can sometimes become a little frustrating in a formal garden bed with lots of open mulch. However, they tend to do just fine within an intentional but not formal style or a completely informal garden style. They may be more predominant in some years than others, but they shouldn't completely take over as long as you didn't put it with really, really delicate plants that need a lot of pampering. On the other hand, if you're putting in a larger pollinator planting from seed, then a lot of times the seed mixes will contain a pretty heavy component of black-eyed Susans, because black-eyed Susans will bloom oftentimes in their first full year of growth and almost definitely during their second full year of growth, which gives you a beautiful burst of color in your new pollinator planting very early on, while many of the other plants in that planting may be still in their vegetative growth and may take 2, 3, 4 years to really start blooming well. Then as those other plants mature and get larger, the black-eyed Susan component is often outcompeted to some degree, so that it then becomes more balanced with only scattered pockets of black-eyed Susans instead of having tons and tons of them like you do during that first year or two. And while I usually recommend planting plants in a new garden-sized area just so that you do get more instant gratification and don't have to wait for the plants to mature and grow, if you are planting a garden-sized plot of seeds, then you might want to think about incorporating that same sort of idea into the new garden bed, where you have quite a few black-eyed Susan seeds in the mix, just so that you have something bloom that first year or two, with the idea that you will weed out any extra black-eyed Susans that you need to later on if they're not naturally outcompeted in the bed. Another native perennial plant, or rather group of native plants, that I love are the mountain mints, Pycnanthemum sp. There are quite a few different species of mountain mints, and despite the name, no, they are not restricted to just the mountains. In fact, many of them are pretty common prairie species. If you're in the eastern two-thirds of the U.S., there is probably a species of mountain mint native to your area. I think there are something like 9 different species native to Kentucky. Bees, butterflies, and predatory wasps all love the mountain mints. And don't worry, the predatory wasps aren't going to hurt you unless you threaten them so much that they feel like they have no other choice, which usually entails doing something like grabbing them or otherwise trapping them. Heather Holm and I talk about that in the episode I did with her about a year or so ago. I'll put a link in the show notes to that episode in case you want to go back and listen to it. Anyway, mountain mints are amazing pollinator magnets. Deer also tend to leave them mostly alone, which can be another benefit. They have a long bloom time, and many of them can be used in teas if you enjoy herbal teas. Just do your research about which ones are best for that, because that's not my area of expertise. Now, just for full disclosure, and in case you didn't pick it up from the name, mountain mints are in the mint family and will spread some. However, they aren't going to go spearmint peppermint crazy and try to take over everything. It is nowhere near the most competitive plant in my garden beds. In fact, I have one bed where I planted one of the mountain mint species with common milkweed, and the common milkweed has outcompeted the mountain mint. In my experience, the mountain mints spread about like bee balm, which is also in the mint family. Oh, speaking of bee balm, one of my favorite garden hacks is to plant bee balm and hoary mountain mint, Pycnanthemum and canum, together. The upper leaves on hoary mountain mint turn bright white as they mature. In some cases, it can look like someone took a can of white spray paint to the leaves. Now, if you've grown bee balm for very long at all, then you probably know that it gets powdery mildew. It doesn't look great, but it doesn't seem to really hurt the plant. And I've come to accept it as just a part of growing bee balm. Anyway, in my garden, the whiteness of the hoary mountain mint leaves typically starts to really show up about the same time that the powdery mildew starts making the bee balm look not so great. But when I plant them together, I find that the powdery mildew kind of gets camouflaged by the nearby hoary mountain mint leaves. There are a couple of different species of mountain mints that also have those whitish leaves, besides just the hoary mountain mint. So if hoary mountain mint isn't native or you can't find it, you may want to look at growing one of those others and doing the same sort of thing in your garden. Goldenrods, Solidago sp, are another pollinator magnet and seem to be even more attractive than the mountain mints, at least on our property. They are also perennials. Bees, butterflies, moths, wasps, beetles, birds, caterpillars, pretty much everything loves goldenrod. Even things that aren't pollinators, such as crab spiders and assassin bugs and praying mantises, can also be found on the goldenrods because they make great hunting grounds as well. One thing that a lot of people don't realize is that there are so many different species of goldenrods. In Kentucky alone, there are approximately 30 different species native to the state, and some of those are even federally threatened or endangered. And because there are so many different species of goldenrods, that means they're pretty diverse. Some species will start blooming in July. Others typically wait until August or September to bloom. And those August-September blooming goldenrods are especially important for migrating butterflies, like the monarch or many of the others that migrate shorter distances. That's why it's so important to wait until after the first frost to mow fields that contain large patches of goldenrods and other fall-blooming flowers. And while we always think of goldenrods as being sun-loving, open field type plants, some goldenrods can grow in some fairly shady areas. Goldenrods, like I said, are much more diverse than they are often given credit for. But just because they are diverse doesn't mean that every species of goldenrod will work equally well in a garden setting. Many of our goldenrods, like the species that turn the fields bright yellow in August and September, spread by runners. Those species are fine for large pollinator plantings, and I love wandering my fields in the late summer and early fall and observing all of the activity on the goldenrods growing there. However, those species are horrible choices for garden settings because they will completely take over everything. Our gardens just don't provide the same level of competition for resources that the fields do. For garden settings, look at goldenrods that form clumps instead of having runners. Sweet goldenrod or aniscenid goldenrod, Solidago odora, is one example of a species with this growth format, but there are several others. These clump-forming goldenrods spread more like most of the other plants in our gardens and will play nice with other plants in the same bed. As a side note, sweet goldenrod leaves mixed with New Jersey tea leaves is reportedly one of the tea substitutes that was often used after the Boston Tea Party. Goldenrods also get a bad rap because they are often blamed for fall allergies. Goldenrods are insect pollinated and thus have big, sticky grains of pollen that can easily attach to bees or other insects. That makes goldenrod pollen not very likely to float around through the air and up your nose. The problem is that goldenrods have big, flashy flowers in order to help attract pollinators, which also makes them more obvious to us. Ragweed, however, blooms at the same time, has tiny green flowers that are very easily overlooked, and produces lots and lots and lots of tiny dry pollen that easily floats in the air, which makes sense because ragweed is wind pollinated. However, not all of that pollen floating in the air lands on another ragweed flower. Some of it can float up your nose or into your eyes, where it causes fall allergies. But since you have to look really hard for ragweed flowers, while goldenrod flowers are screaming for attention, it's the goldenrod flowers that get the blame for the problems the ragweed is causing. Okay, that's 4 species. So if I'm going to keep this to 5 species that I love, then I can only talk about one more species in this episode. And I can't talk about late summer, July, August blooming plants that I love without talking about cut plant, Silphium perfoliatum. Although I don't have a true favorite flower for this time of year, cut plant comes really, really close to being able to claim that title. It has tons of bright yellow sunflower-like flowers that are a couple of inches or so across. The cheeriness of the flowers themselves just make me smile. They make me even happier when I see all of the activity happening around them. Multiple species of bees and butterflies, plus hummingbirds and clear-winged moths, are drawn like crazy to the flowers. Then when it goes to seed, the goldfinches descend upon it and absolutely devour the seeds. But even before it flowers, cut plants are full of life. The leaves encircle the stem to form waterproof cups that will hold water from heavy dews or rainstorms. Insects and birds will get water out of the cups, while tree frogs will use the cups as their own private pool. It's just such an amazing and fun plant, and an absolute pollinator magnet that is also valuable for so many other types of wildlife. However, as much as I love it, it is not a plant that I recommend for everyone. In fact, I end up trying to talk a lot of people out of it who have heard me talking about it and decide that they want to try it too. The reason is because this is an extremely aggressive plant for a garden bed. I planted 4 or 5 cut plants in an approximately 15 by 20 foot garden bed maybe 5 or 6 years ago. That bed is now almost exclusively cut plant. It is also popping up all over the farm. In the fields, it doesn't seem to be spreading or taking over as quickly. I'm guessing for the same reasons that the goldenrods growing in our fields don't form a complete monoculture. Everything that grows in that field is more or less equally competitive, and so they can hold their own against each other. However, there's an area right next to the original garden bed, which we don't mow very often. And the cut plant that was growing in that original bed, the seeds from it can very easily fall into this neighboring area. And this neighboring area used to be almost solid Johnson grass. Notice that I said it used to be. I believe this is the 3rd year since the cut plant jumped into that new area. And this year the cut plant has completely suppressed the Johnson grass. I'm not complaining. I would much rather have cut plants than Johnson grass. But a monoculture of anything is not good. But if you're familiar with Johnson grass, then that should give you an idea of just how aggressive cut plant can be, at least in my area. Your soils and conditions might be different and give you slightly different results. Obviously, this is not a plant that you can put in a garden bed and expect it to play nice with other plants in the same bed, even in a very informal planting style. It needs to be somewhere that it has room to spread and can go a little wilder. Also, don't plant it right next to a wall or a house or a barn or anything that would block it from the wind. I planted my original cut plants in a sheltered area that is mostly blocked from the wind in 3 directions. And every year, when we get our summer thunderstorms and associated winds, the cut plant flops. The pollinators and everything still love it, but it's leaning out into the driveway and lying on top of each other and just not standing up and looking nice. However, where the birds have planted it in the fields and it is growing exposed to the wind in all directions, it tends to stand up straighter. The movement created by the wind as the plant is growing helps to strengthen the stem and allow it to remain standing, even though the more protected specimens are knocked over. So there you have 5 native plants that I love, which bloom in July and August. Like I said, there are many more that I also love, and I'm open to sharing those with you in the future. In the meantime, what are some of your favorite native plants that bloom during this time of year? You can let me know by going to the webpage for this episode and leaving a comment. Let me know too if you would like for me to do more of this style of episode. Also, if you're looking for some simple, quick, and easy ways to attract pollinators to your yard, ones that don't necessarily require you to wait for something to grow, then you may want to check out my newest book, Attract Pollinators and Wildlife to Your Yard, 15 Free and Easy Ways. Visit the webpage for this episode to learn more about the book and to place your order. Until next week, I encourage you to take some time to enjoy the nature in your own yard and community.